Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me again great pleasure to present another episode in the program Civilization and Technology. We have put together these two intriguing words because we realize that all the civilizations of the world really had some technology behind their development. Or, as we sometimes argue, that civilizations, by virtue of being a civilization, were conducive to producing different technologies. And today, we have a very interesting example to present to you. The Islamic world looked for ways to sail the seas. And above all, they were intrigued by astronomy. They were intrigued by all what they saw in the sea, all what they saw in the sky. Now, many of the Islamic scholars were astronomers. That means they knew the main stars that were in the heavens. They also knew that certain stars and certain planets gave certain directions. And by looking up into the heavens, they could navigate to a large extent in certain directions. They knew there was a star which was called the North Star. In fact, it was not an Islamic discovery. Ancient Egypt knew about the zodiac. The ancient Egyptians knew about the heavens. They had their astronomers. And without doubt, this was passed on, civilizations pass on knowledge, especially in astronomy. They pass on knowledge to other civilizations. Now, in the Islamic world, there are very important things that were generated by this world religion. One was time. Why was time important to the Islamic world? Because Islam said that there were certain times to pray. It was al-Fajr, it was Dhuhr, midday, or sundown, or sunset, or any other time of the 5 different times that Muslims pray. So it was very important to know the time. So time was an element, and the technology which enabled me to know the time exactly. It was not correct to pray at the wrong time. It was wrong not to know when midday was. I mean, you can't just say it's midday now and go and pray al-Dhuhr. Now, of course, there are modern ways, and you've got TV and radio, and all this are technologies which remind you. You've got even a wristwatch which will give you. But at that time, it was this essential that Islamic technology would produce something to measure time. The other thing was to measure direction. Now, why direction? Because you had to pray towards Mecca. Now, Mecca, if you are in Europe, you will pray in a certain direction. If you are in the south of Africa, you will pray in another direction. Because being in Egypt, you will pray towards the south, not south exactly, but southeast. If I went to Europe, I would be more towards another direction of the south. So it was very important for Islamic scholars, Islamic navigators, to know directions. So we need time, we need direction. But if you're in the sea, what else do you need? You need to know where you are. Now, the Islamic scholars with their knowledge of astronomy knew that if they could measure the angle towards any planet, the sun, the moon, if they could measure this angle, they would know where they were. So the earliest astronomers were always trying to find out how to plot the stars, how to find where you are on land, but mostly on sea, because on land you know there's a mountain, there's a river, but on the sea, if you're away from the coast, the sea is just one blue mass of waves and water, and you can't see. You don't know exactly where you are until you see the seashore and you know that this is a place that you're familiar with. So they developed the compass, and this episode is really trying to look at one main instrument that was used by the Arab seamen. Actually, to be fair, it was used by many seamen after, around that and at that vicinity, and it became an instrument that was also due to the Islamic expansion into Spain. There are many astrolabs, or we'll call it an astrolab in this case because it has a tint of the Arabic in it. There are many of them that still exist and are available to see in the museums of the world. If you go to Spain, you'll find many replicas of this wonderful instrument made of brass. It had to be made of a metal, and brass, which was a beautiful yellow color, was easy to shape. You could cut it. Mostly an astrolabe was round, so you would be able to draw a circle, because Islamic scholars and scientists knew how to work with all the different shapes, circles, squares, all that. And they developed a system by which, having a round piece of metal marked with certain marks of time, of direction, of angles, they could manipulate exactly their situation or their place in the middle of the sea. So the astrolabe became an instrument of the seamen, the Islamic seamen, the Arab seamen. It was used on land, of course, also. But the big thing was there was no ship on the seas that did not have this instrument. Of course, there was the magnetic needle, which showed more or less this is north, this is south, east and west. And but they could see that east and west is the east sun came out from a certain part to the east, so this would be east, and they would go down in the west, so you knew that this was the north in the middle. But to know exactly where you were, you had to use this novel instrument. It was composed of, just spend a few minutes on the composition to know how it was made. It was made of a basic, let's call it a basic round piece of metal, brass, and it had two moving parts. I would just look and see exactly the parts, the names. We have the riti, which was the part at the top, and we have also the alidade, which was the bottom. Now, these two are the most important parts of this instrument. One, the moving discs, which are on top, and the other one, what was put at the base, and the middle there was a fulcrum, or there was a small knob to keep them in place. Now, what is important to know in order to appreciate the Islamic input and the knowledge and the technology that's put into this instrument, you had to have many discs, and the discs were not valid for everywhere. I mean, you couldn't go and sail around the bottom of the African continent and have the same discs. Every area of the sea or the world had its discs. That means the discs had to be, curves had to be drawn, they had to be marked, they had to be recorded according to the navigators who were going to use this. So there was always the first navigator who would produce this wonderful instrument and use it. Now, I'm sorry to say that at the moment very few people are left who know how to use this instrument, because what do you need? After that, there was another instrument which was called the sextant. It was more elaborate. You could take the angle towards any planet and measure the angle. So the sextant more or less pushed the astrolabe out of the circulation. But what I'd like to say is that this instrument is a very valuable object to have in a museum. The Islamic Museum in Cairo has got a number of them, very valuable ones, authentic. Most museums of the world have managed to procure them, to find them, to take them, and to put them in their museums. Many scholars have revived the knowledge and the technology of using this instrument, even though it is out of date because you have to put in the discs and the accuracy is also not the same as using satellites of now time, or using a GPS, geographic positioning instrument, of course, but we're talking about hundreds of years back. So this was the instrument that created a marine civilization in the Islamic world. Now, as I said, they exist. You can see them in the Islamic Museum in Cairo. Some very, very good collections. If you tap any international source on this subject, you'll find a lot of them. They have the names of the people who made them. I mean, the scientist or the mariner who worked on them would put his name on them. It became known that this was the Astrolab of Ahmad ibn Ali, for example. And it would be cherished and valued because it had a value to work on. So, to wrap up what we have to say on this wonderful instrument, we can say civilization of the Islamic world, which helped people travel along these expanses. In fact, the Red Sea was not the sea of the Islamic world, the Mediterranean also. The movement towards Spain. In Spain, there are many examples of this Astrolab, beautiful pieces which are very well recorded, and the tables have been calculated. There are many readings you can find, and what I'd like to say is that there are many sources now which tell you how to make one yourself. So this ancient instrument is now available. You can get the design and you can make it yourself, and you can try and find out where you are. So this technology is interesting that it has continued, not effectively, but it exists. So here we have again a beautiful example of technology which created a civilization which ruled the seas for very many years. The Islamic world was the first domain to use this instrumentation. Ladies and gentlemen, we unfortunately are at the end of this episode on the Astrolab, one of the most important instruments which used Islamic technology for navigation in times which were not very far back from now. I wish you a very good evening and looking forward to see you again in the next episode in our next meeting. Thank you.